Welcome back everyone to another video. Today we're going to be learning the London system opening. This is a good opening for a lot of levels, intermediate, beginner, even into advanced. I still play this at like 1700 ELO and it still works pretty well. But we're going to be giving this from the perspective of a non-rated player. So hopefully we're going to get into some positions that you might see in your beginner games that won't often happen in advanced games because everyone will be going into theory. So we start here with the move d4, d5, and bishop f4. This is the London system. Your goal in the London basically is to take control of this e5 square, and you're going to see a lot of the moves have a lot of pressure on the center here. But in any system, this is basically how the London system starts, is with the move d4 and bishop f4. Not every opening can be played into the London, but we'll go into a couple of those later. So we're going to start with this mirror variation, and we're going to get one of the most common moves, which you'll see here is knight f6. Oftentimes at low elos, no matter what, people will bring two knights out, bring the bishops out, and in some order, this is one of the most common moves. So we get knight out, and then you play your knight to f3. So your goal here is to play this move e3 next, and you're going to see they'll play something like bishop f5, where basically they're just copying you. So you can play e3, you finish your pyramid, and then they might copy you continually, and then you can play bishop out, and they have a couple lines here. They can take, they can slide back, but most commonly you might just see take, especially at lower elos. People just like to take and take, and you can take a few ways. You can take with the queen, you can take with the pawn. The pawn, you just have to make sure you know how to push in the center and have a pawn break. So we're going to take with the queen to make it easy. They might play something like bishop out here, and there's a few things you can do here. You can slide the bishop back, which is very common, so that if they take, you open up this file, and this rook becomes really powerful. And if they just do something like castling, you can castle if you want, or you can delay castling and just do something like bringing the knight out and castling later, or making an attack with the rook and the queen because you're both staring right at that square. Now, if we go back to this position that we had earlier, before they mirror, you might oftentimes see something like the move c5. And against the London, c5 is very common and the most useful too. At lower elos, oftentimes they'll do things like this and they block their c-pawn, which isn't ideal. It's actually better for you. We'll go into that a bit, but c5 is one of the most strong moves here, and it's attacking the center. They're threatening to go here, but basically you can just respond with either the move c3 to defend, or you can continue your pyramid with e3. So we'll do c3 first. It's most natural. You're defending the pawn here, and oftentimes they just take, and this is fine. If they take at any point, you just finish your development. They might go here, they do this, maybe you'll trade, and then you just bring the bishop out. They do something like knight c6. You can bring your knight here to c3 or d2, either one now, because this c file is now open. So you can go here, they might castle and castle. And now you have a very slight advantage here, but you have nice plans here. Your goal here is to often bring the rooks onto the c file. So they could do something like this, and you want to control the c file because oftentimes in the London, since the c pawn is so valuable and a key asset here, the c file often becomes very open, and you might want to build an attack here along the c file with your rooks potentially. Doubled rooks are very powerful, especially if you're threatening here. Now in this position, they can go knight, b4 to attack your rook, and it becomes very weak. But oftentimes this position here with the rooks is very powerful. So let's go back again here. Let's go all the way back to the beginning here. They play the move knight f6. You can always do something like knight g3 or e3. A lot of the times you can do stuff in slightly different order, and it's still good for white no matter what. But we'll go with this move. And then if you ever see the move c6, this is a bad move. This is a good move for you because oftentimes they stop their own development a little bit, and you could just continue with, no matter what they do, continue development. They might go here, here, take, bishop out, castle, and this is fine. It's roughly equal, but c6 usually isn't great, especially if they play a Caro-Kann. If you see a Caro-Kann, c6, d5, and then it's actually not very good for black. Now, for the London, there's also some ideas here, especially at the beginning, depending on how the person plays. A lot of the times you'll see this move, knight c6, and this is not a good move against the London. So there is some traps here. If they do something like this, for example, you get to this position, and then you'd have something like this. You can go the move queen d3. Now, the best move against this is rook here, and this is fine. You can just continue development and ignore it for now, but if they don't play that and they instead play the move b6, thinking they defend the pawn, this knight is now super weak, and you have this move bishop b5, pins the knight, and no matter what you do, you're going to win some material here. If they defend like this, then you bring your queen. So after you bring your queen, they might have to just unpin themselves here, for example. You can just take, they move their king, you can jump the knight into the center, there's a check here, and it's just very winning for white in this position. So if we go back here, this is a common trap, and especially at lower elos, you can do this because oftentimes they don't want to move the rook right away, but they think, oh, I'm just defending the pawn. But instead, you pin the knight and you win a lot of material. Now, if we go back here to the beginning, let's go back to here, this position, and a lot of times you might see bad moves like at the beginning here, like knight c6, because beginners think they can just develop the knights nonchalantly and just go on with their day, but it's actually good for you because this blocking of the c pawn is usually not what you want to do against the London. It's roughly equal at the beginning, but long term it can be damaging. And oftentimes there's also things like this where beginners forget to count, and you can in fact just take because you win a pawn. And I saw that a lot, especially below 1,000. So always watch in the center and make sure that when a pawn moves, you count how many defenders it has versus how many attackers it has. So now we're going to look at a couple of different openings that you might face against the London where you can't actually play the London exactly. So if one of those is the Englund Gambit, and especially at low elos, you might see this a lot. And what I like to do is take the pawn, and one of the common moves is knight c6, and I like to just ignore it. So I defend, they might bring the queen out, and I just ignore the Englund Gambit because there is some theory, and if you're not careful, you could lose a queen or you might even get mated. So they could just take, they win the pawn back, and you're equal again in material, but you actually have an advantage because you're nice and developed, and all they've done is lose a knight and bring out the queen. You might do this, you see something like this, you can defend, they attack, you go here, you might get like take, for example, take, attack the knight, go back, and then now you're equal again, and you're much more developed. Now, for example, another opening you might see, if we go all the way back here, is something like a Dutch defense. And in this position, you can just play the London. You can continue to develop. I'm not sure totally on Dutch theory, but if they play something like this, where they just do this, they bring the bishop here, they castle, you can just play in an opening like this, where you still play the London. It's just, it might be a different setup. But just be wary of potential pawn storms on this side. And always be careful to leave yourself a nice square for both your king and your bishop to come back in case it ever gets trapped by pawns over here. Now, I did want to move on to something else like this setup here. So sometimes you might be playing the London. Oops, that's not the London. Play this, and you get something like this. You get a King's Indian defense. So you can still start with this. You still start with bishop f4 and pawn to d4, but you might get an order like this. And as soon as they do a setup like a King's Indian, you can go for a Jobava London setup. So instead of the knight to its normal square here, you can jump the knight to c3, and then if they just play slowly, you go strike right in the center, and you take both the center space here with these pawns. And then oftentimes you can just do something like knight out here. They can castle. You can put your queen on d2 is often sometimes the goal here in these setups, and you actually can long castle instead of castling short. So you set up this battery here, they might just play something like this. Now in this position, you actually is best to long castle because now you have this battery here, and then if they just play like a waiting move, something like here, then you can just go for this oftentimes and start an attack over here potentially with these pawns. If they take, then your queen gets right in and you can start busting open this side of the board with pawns, and you have a knight jumping ready to jump in here. Or if they don't take, then you could potentially just start moving these pawns here. Now let's go over to this board here, and we're going to do a recap quick. So if you haven't been paying attention, or if you want some simple things to remember, we're going to start here. So the first thing is, this is the main setup for the London. What I have here, this is an example position, but this is your goal for the setup, where you have the bishop here, you have the knights in positions like this defending each other, you have this nice bishop square looking at this diagonal a lot of the time, and then your goal is going to take control over this e5 square, bring the rooks to the c-file, e-file, whatever you want, depending on your situation. But this is the main setup and goal of the London. The second thing to remember is that if the opponent has not played c5, then you should take advantage of it. In the London, the main goal is to open up the c-file, and that will often happen, or potentially close it down here, where you have your bishop oftentimes get trapped in this little square here. But if the opponent has not played c5, then make sure to take advantage of that. Maybe you can play moves like c4 and open up the c-file yourself so that you have an advantage as opposed to your opponent. And then the third thing to remember is make sure to look at computer lines. because a lot of the times in the London you can get into very similar positions, but because certain things were played in different orders, then maybe that something else was good this time, but something else might be better next time, even though the positions themselves look very similar. And the fourth thing to remember is just to have fun and play whatever you want during the London. Like, for example, you might try to go for queen traps over here, because what works for an 800 won't work for a 1600 potentially. So just have fun with it, try your own little ideas, try opening up the center, try doing really big pawn pushes that might not work at high level but could work at an 800 level because an opponent doesn't know how to take advantage of it. And just remember, there's a lot of openings and ideas that I didn't cover in this video, so just go play, review your games, go to an analysis board, review positions, and just have fun with it, because there's a lot of things I didn't cover in this video, so you can go try covering it yourself. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. Maybe you'll start playing London in your games, but I'll see you in the next video. Like and subscribe. Bye guys.